You know, when you read the Gospel of Luke, there's this one question that just keeps popping up over and over. Who is this guy, Jesus? Is he a prophet? A political rebel? Something else? In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into a single chapter that really unpacks this whole identity crisis, from what the public was speculating to a shocking private revelation. Let's get into it. Okay, so our story kicks off, and it's not with some long sermon. It's actually more like a deployment. Jesus gets his 12 closest followers, his apostles, together. But he's not just keeping them around to listen to him talk. No, he's building a team, and he's sending them out on a very specific and very powerful mission. And what's really important here is that the focus isn't just on ideas, it's all about action. 3 key verbs really drive this whole moment. First, he called them. He personally put the team together. Second, he gave them his own power and authority. And third, he sent them out. The message couldn't be clearer. They were being empowered to do the exact same stuff he had been doing. And yeah, their mission was super specific. This wasn't just about, going out and spreading a message. The Gospel of Luke makes it crystal clear that for Jesus, proclamation and power were 2 sides of the same coin. The words about the kingdom were always paired with these tangible, supernatural acts of healing. You couldn't have one without the other. So, as you can imagine, this mission, it doesn't exactly fly under the radar. It's a huge success, it creates a massive stir, and the news travels fast. I mean, it goes all the way to the top, right to the regional political leader, a guy named Herod the Tetrarch. And all this buzz, it leaves Herod totally baffled and honestly pretty terrified. This isn't just political curiosity for him. This is a ruler who's haunted by his own past actions, and he gets absolutely desperate to figure out who is behind this powerful new movement. And the rumors flying around, they're just making things worse for him. People are throwing out all kinds of wild theories. Maybe he's John the Baptist come back from the dead. Or, hey, what if it's the great prophet Elijah who's returned? Or maybe he's one of the ancient prophets, just reborn with even more power. And you can hear the paranoia right in Herod's own words. He says, "John I beheaded." He knows exactly what he did. So just imagine his terror. If this new guy is John the Baptist, he is now facing the ghost of a man he already executed who has somehow come back from the grave, even more powerful than before. All right, so this massive question is just hanging there in the air, right? Who is this guy? And how does the story answer it? Well, not with some big theological breakdown or a philosophical speech. Instead, we get a story, a powerful demonstration of who Jesus is through his actions, the feeding of the 5,000. So here's the scene. Jesus is faced with this huge, hungry crowd, and they're out in the middle of nowhere. And get this, that 5,000 number, that's just counting the men. The real crowd was probably way, way bigger. This is setting the stage for a miracle on an absolutely incredible scale. And what's so brilliant about this miracle is how it shows you everything about Jesus' approach. This isn't just a feel-good story about food, it's a perfect picture of a holistic ministry. Look at the 3 parts. First, you've got proclamation. He speaks the message of the kingdom. Then there's healing. He meets their supernatural needs. And finally, you see provision. He takes care of their basic physical need for food. For Jesus, these weren't separate jobs. They were all part of one single integrated mission. Okay, so right after this huge public miracle, what does Jesus do? He pulls back. He gets his disciples alone for a private conversation that is about to become the turning point for this entire story. This is where Jesus just comes right out and asks the question that's on everyone's mind. Who do people say that I am? And the disciples, they just repeat the popular theories we heard earlier. John the Baptist, Elijah, a prophet. But then Jesus makes it personal. He looks at them and asks, "But who do you say I am?" And that's when Peter nails it. He says, "The Messiah of God." But, and this is a huge but, the second Peter gets the answer right, Jesus just completely flips the script. Look at the expectation they had. A triumphant warrior king who is going to come in and crush all their enemies. But Jesus shatters that image. He hits him with this completely different, shocking reality. He says he's not a conquering king, he is the Son of Man, and his destiny is to suffer, be rejected, and ultimately be killed. So this shocking new job description for the Messiah, well, it leads straight to a totally radical new idea of what it means to be his follower. Because think about it. If your leader's path is one of suffering, what in the world does that mean for you? Yeah, following this Messiah, It's not about gaining power or fame. Jesus lays out this incredibly demanding three-part path. First, deny yourself. That means letting go of your own agenda and ambitions. Second, take up your cross daily. That's an image of embracing public shame and total self-sacrifice. And third, follow me, a total commitment to his new, unexpected path of a suffering servant. So here's the main takeaway, and it's a big one. Luke is showing us that the Christian life is meant to directly mirror the path of Jesus. Suffering isn't some sign that you've failed or done something wrong. Nope, it's actually presented as a core, expected part of the whole journey. And that's where Jesus leaves them, and us. After turning everything they thought they knew on its head about who he was and what it meant to follow him, he drops this one last piercing question. He's forcing a complete rethink of what we consider valuable. It's a challenge that cuts straight to the heart of our modern priorities, basically asking us to look at our own lives and wonder, what, in the end, is worth losing everything for?